Good evening, Dr. Yánis Varoufakis, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
My great pleasure. Good evening to you, sir.
Thank you. My first question relates to the recent announcement by US President Trump during his meeting with Netanyahu, who is wanted by the International Criminal Court of his intention to evict the population of Gaza, relocate them to other land, and take over Gaza to turn it into an icon of the East.
Well, my first comment is that this is the dream of the Zionist initiators of the Nakba, of the catastrophe of the Palestinian people. It is the dream of having a Palestine without Palestinians. So essentially, what Donald Trump was doing was, in the presence of the Prime Minister of Israel, who has been, as you correctly said, indicted for war crimes by the International Criminal Court, in the presence of this indicted war criminal, effectively to present him with the greatest gift that Netanyahu could have ever imagined in his 25 or so years of being in political life in Israel, which is the offer of the United States supporting Netanyahu's long time-honored ambition of a Palestine without Palestinians. In one move, Donald Trump initiated the destruction of international law, the violation of the Fourth Geneva Conventions, which explicitly condemns as a war crime any attempt forcibly to remove a population from its native land. And in the process of doing that, essentially, Donald Trump created a lacuna of moral and political legitimation for NATO itself. My question to the President of France, Mr. Macron, to the still Chancellor of Germany, Mr. Scholz, to the British Prime Minister, Mr. Starmer, is how dare you consider the United States of America an ally of your countries, of Europe, when the United States is essentially tearing up the agreement between civilized nations after 1945 of never again committing genocide, of never again siding with politicians who are planning the ethnic cleansing of a whole area. Never again should, that was what we proclaimed as a civilization of humans, of women and men. In 1945, we proclaimed that never again would one country conquer another, annex its territory, and treat its native population as expedient. So it was a significant week and a very significant announcement by Donald Trump, one that now makes Europeans, and particularly our leaderships, forces them to make a choice. Either become complicit in utter violation of every principle of international law, or break relations with NATO and the United States.
You have a problem with off connection.
Oh, did we? Did you? But this has already been uploaded, so you're okay.
Yeah.
I completed my answer, so you will have it.
Yeah. We can repeat this.
No. It's already been recorded, because this StreamYard will upload it, right? So what I said is going to go in there.
Yeah. Immediately after the event of 7 October, you state that the West is responsible for the tragedy of the Palestinians people today. Can the West also be held responsible for more than 15 months of genocide against the Palestinians?
The comment that I made on the 8th of October, the day after the 7th of October in 2023, was one that I stick to. My comment was that it is Europe's responsibility what is happening, has been happening for the last 80 years. You hear me now?
Yeah.
Shall I do this? I need to do this answer again, because I'm sure this one must have been interrupted.
Wait,
Okay,
yeah.
so I remember your question, so I'll go. On the 8th of October, a day after the 7th of October attack by Hamas and its allies against the Israeli border guards, I made the comment, as you quite correctly suggested, I made the comment that the tragedy in the Middle East, especially in Palestine, is entirely the responsibility of Europe. For centuries, we have persecuted, we Europeans, collectively, we have persecuted we essentially participated in the transfer of Jews from Europe to Palestine, essentially treating Palestine as if it was our own land and siding with the Zionist lie that it was an empty land, a land without a people, for a people without a land. The moment you say a land without a people, for a people without a land, essentially what you're doing is this is the first step towards ethnically cleansing, exterminating the people who have been on the land that you have just characterized as a land without a people. So that's right from the beginning. This was an official European policy with a Balfour Declaration and so on and so forth. Now, after the 7th of October, the European Union, in its great wisdom, I'm saying this ironically, bathed the European Union buildings with the flag of Israel. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, went to Israel and cheered on the IDF, the Israeli army, just before it invaded Gaza. And meanwhile, the German government was procuring weapons, bombs, and other lethal weaponry on behalf of Israel, while cheering on the United States equivalent supply of the instruments of mass death, destruction, and genocide to Israel. So, yes, Europe is the beginning and the conclusion of this gross responsibility for the genocide which is happening in front of us. And the tragedy is double. It's double-edged. Because we who were responsible for anti-Semitism, for the pogroms and the Holocaust against the Jewish people, are also the ones who are legitimizing the genocide of the Palestinians as synonymous with fighting against anti-Semitism, as if two genocides cancel each other out. They don't. Two wrongs do not one right make.
Yeah. After 7 October and the events we witnessed, can we continue to talk about the two-state solution?
The two-state solution is a very convenient hypocrisy on the part of the West. There is no doubt that the two-state solution is very deeply etched in the hearts and minds of Palestinians as a way out of their apartheid circumstances, a way out of their enslavement, essentially, to what is a state of occupation. It was also enshrined in the United Nations original 1947 proposal, 2 states, 1 Palestinian, 1 Israeli, side by side. But whatever the merits of the two-state solution, for the last 25 years, Mr. Netanyahu and other politicians, Ariel Sharon was the first one. Netanyahu is simply an able successor to Ariel Sharon, set out to destroy any possibility of a two-state solution. And they did this in a variety of ways. Firstly, they did it by supporting Hamas in order to undermine the Palestinian Authority. Secondly, they co-opted the Palestinian Authority, rendering it essentially a collaborator of Israel. Thirdly, they expanded the settlements, the illegal settlements in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. And Mr. Netanyahu has been particularly successful at running rings around every American president he's ever encountered, and essentially ridiculing any Western leader has stuck to the idea of the two-state solution because, let's face it, everything that Israel has done since the 1990s on the ground in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and of course Gaza, was intended to make a two-state solution absolutely impossible. So when the West keeps banging on about the two-state solution, while at the same time supporting and being complicit with Netanyahu, who has made the two-state solution impossible, the West's hypocrisy is writ large. It is projected in multiple colors upon the screen of history. The fact of the matter is that with every day that goes by, the possibility of a viable two-state solution is shrinking. And that is something that should problematize people of goodwill and good faith, because in reality, if you look at it historically, whenever there's been a white imperialist colonizing settlement project, because this is what Israel is. It is a settlement process. It is settler colonialism. A European people, essentially European people, have gone with the blessings of the British, of the Americans, of the European Union to Palestine, to a land full of natives. They declared it a terra nullius, a land without a people, and they've begun ethnically cleansing it in order to take over the land in exactly the same way that the white settlers did in the west of the United States, actually the whole of the United States, what the British did in Australia, what the Germans tried to do in Namibia, what the Boers were doing along with the British in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, in Kenya. Historically, if you look at all those examples, there are only 3 outcomes that seem likely. One is genocide. The United States has managed, Australia has managed to get rid of the native populations, or to shrink them to such an extent that they've been utterly diluted, or placed in reservations, as in the United States. That's one solution. That's what Netanyahu wants. That's what the Israeli regime wants. The second solution is some kind of apartheid state, a halfway house, where you've got the dominant settlers, and then you've got Bantustans full of the non-citizens who are used as a pool of labor. That's what South Africa tried to do. But we saw how that ended. And how did it end in the end? Well, the third solution is the third possible outcome is a situation where you know the apartheid state, the settler project fails, and the settlers have to accept that they will live side by side with equal rights with the settled. Now, there's never been a case where you had two states next to one another, one of the settlers and one of the colonized. It could have happened. Let's say that after the Oslo Accords, that Israel accepted the idea. They never accepted the idea of a Palestinian state. Arafat gave it to them. They wouldn't have it. They kept making demands upon Arafat that Arafat could never, ever agree to, because essentially they were saying that the apartheid state should be recognized as a two-state solution. So they didn't choose that, and they chose to go all out ethnically to cleanse the Palestinians. And now I'm very much afraid that with the war in Gaza, the massacre, the genocide, it's not even a war. It's so one-sided, you can never really call it a war. Humanity is facing only two options. One is a settler victory and the annihilation of the Palestinians. That's the Trump plan, a Palestine without Palestinians. Or alternatively, some arrangement by which the colonized and the colonizers live side by side with equal political rights. That is the one that we should be working towards if we want to be remembered as a generation that is not completely morally culpable.
Dr. Varoufakis, last question from Ukraine to Gaza. Is it a sign of the failure of international law and the United Nations to impose peace?
To do what?
To impose peace, to make peace.
Okay. Well, in 1945, when the victors of the Second World War got together to create the United Nations, to create the International Court of Justice, to rejig and calibrate the Geneva Conventions, the collective will of the civilized world, which included the United States and the Soviet Union, East and West, capitalist and communist countries, the collective will was never again. Never again must there be a war of conquest. Never again will one power decide to annex the lands of some other nation, of some other people. Never again will dispute regarding territory be settled by the force of arms. That was our collective desire. That was our collective decision. So, yes, the United Nations, international law is all about peaceful resolution of disagreements. We see that these rules are being treated with contempt, and what we effectively have is a West which cynically and hypocritically waxes lyrical about international law, about the United Nations, when it suits the West. When it doesn't suit the West, they effectively drag the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court through the mud or ignore it. So when, for instance, Vladimir Putin orders his troops to cross the border with Ukraine and invade Ukraine, an all-out invasion, immediately the United States, Britain, other countries of the West rush to the Security Council of the United Nations to demand a condemnation of what Russia is doing. They applaud vigorously when the International Criminal Court indicts Vladimir Putin. But when another country violates exactly the same principles, like Israel in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in Gaza, suddenly the United Nations is an institution to be ignored. The International Criminal Court's indictment of Netanyahu is to be ignored. In the final analysis, what we must remind ourselves here in the West is that international law either applies to everyone or it applies to no one. And by picking and choosing whom we are going to apply international law to, essentially, we're destroying international law. And by destroying international law, we are going back, we are reneging on our collective promise in 1945 that never again will the world be ruled by the dictum that might is right.
Dr. Varoufakis, thank you again for accepting our invitation. Thank you. I look for another meeting with you. Thank you very much.
My great pleasure. Thank you.